The alarm echoed through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Tactical Academy with an urgency David Chen had never heard before. It wasn't the gentle chime that signaled the start of classes, nor the moderate tone of the combat simulators. It was a sharp, insistent pulse, the kind of alert reserved for emergencies that threatened the structural integrity of the orbital station. David rose from the narrow bunk of his rest capsule, his movements cautious in the reduced artificial gravity. At 23, he was the only human among 247 cadets at the Galactic Federation's most prestigious military institution. His presence there was the result of an obscure diplomatic agreement between Earth and the Velothi, the species that dominated the Central Council. To most instructors, he was a curiosity. To the other students, a running joke. The corridor was empty when David emerged from his quarters. The translucent walls pulsed with blue light, powered by the quantum processors that controlled every aspect of the academy. He sprinted toward the simulation hall, his racing heart pumping adrenaline through his circulatory system. The Velothi didn't need that. Their refined bodies operated with perfect efficiency, processing information at speeds that turned seconds into eternities of thought. When the main simulator doors hissed open, David found organized chaos. All the cadets in his class were present, their slender, translucent bodies glowing under the cold illumination. In the center of the room, Commander Thelkar observed a three-dimensional hologram showing a region of space David immediately recognized: the Carvonus Nebula, a starship graveyard where unpredictable gravitational fields and radiation clouds turned any battle into a logistical nightmare. Thelkar was a veteran of 17 military campaigns, each conducted with the surgical precision that characterized Velothi doctrine. His translucent skin revealed bioluminescent neural networks that pulsed in hypnotic patterns as he processed information. When he spoke, his voice was modulated by the neural translation implant all cadets carried. "Protocol update," Thelkar announced, his three compound eyes focusing simultaneously on different sections of the room. "The final examination has been moved up. All candidates will be tested within the next 48 hours. The scenario remains unchanged: direct confrontation against Atheon." A murmur swept through the room. Atheon was the living legend of the Federation, the tactical artificial intelligence that had ensured military supremacy for over 200 Earth years. No organic commander had ever surpassed its predictions. The best result ever recorded by any cadet was 37% tactical effectiveness, achieved by a Velothi prodigy 3 cycles prior. David felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He knew what they were thinking. The human would be the first to fail, probably spectacularly. He had spent the last 18 months proving he could keep up, but no one expected him to survive the final test. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their surprising physical resilience and ability to consume toxic substances without dying, but military strategy required processing speed his species simply didn't possess. "Cadet Chen," Thelkar's voice cut through his thoughts. "You will be first." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation systems seemed to have paused. David walked to the center of the room, his steps echoing on the crystal floor. He had no illusions about his chances. Atheon processed trillions of variables per second, anticipating moves before its opponents even conceived them. Against a mind like that, Human logic was like a candle trying to illuminate the vacuum of space. The neural simulator was activated, and David felt the familiar sensation of sensory expansion. His consciousness merged with the command, ship's interface, transforming thoughts into instantaneous orders. Around him, the void of simulated space materialized with terrifying perfection. 16 Raptor-class combat ships orbited his position, each equipped with state-of-the-art shields and quantum pulse weaponry. It was a respectable fleet for any novice commander. Then, Atheon manifested its presence. 64 ships emerged from warp space, perfect formations unfolding like the petals of a deadly flower. Each ship was superior in armor and firepower. The asymmetry was intentional. The test wasn't about winning, but about how long you could survive and how much tactical effectiveness you demonstrated before the inevitable defeat. David took a deep breath, a human habit. His Velathi colleagues considered inefficient. He organized his fleet into a classic delta formation, positioning his most armored ships at the vanguard. It was the obvious move, taught in the first weeks of training. Atheon responded instantly. 3 strike groups broke away from the main formation, executing flanking maneuvers that exploited the Delta's blind spots. David's ships tried to reposition, but the artificial intelligence had already predicted every adjustment. Antimatter torpedoes crossed the simulated space, disabling shields with millimeter precision. In 90 seconds, David had lost 4 ships. He attempted a dispersal maneuver, spreading his fleet to force Atheon to divide its focus. The response was brutal. The artificial intelligence concentrated fire on his weakest units, eliminating them one by one while maintaining constant pressure on the main ships. Every attempt at a counterattack was predicted and neutralized before it could even materialize. 5 minutes into the simulation, David had lost 11 of the 16 ships. Sweat beaded on his forehead, another biological waste the Velathi didn't understand. He could feel the enemy fleet closing in, executing a perfect siege that would eliminate his remaining ships in less than 3 minutes. The weight of imminent defeat pressed down on his shoulders. It was at that moment that something shifted inside him. David looked at the battlefield not as a Velathi officer trying to beat a machine at its own game, but as a human facing the impossible. And humans, he knew, had a long history of turning the impossible into the improbable. He stopped trying to predict Atheon. He stopped following tactical doctrine. He stopped thinking the way his professors expected, and he started to improvise. His 5 remaining ships separated into seemingly random vectors, entering the Carvonis Nebula at angles that defied all tactical logic. He directed a damaged ship straight into an unstable gravitational field, not to escape, but to use its own destruction as bait. Atheon followed the pattern, sending 4 ships to intercept. David detonated the ship's antimatter reactors at the exact moment the enemy fleet entered the gravitational influence zone. The explosion created a cascade of spatial distortions that destabilized the shields of 3 enemy ships. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it opened a window of opportunity. His 4 remaining ships emerged from impossible routes, using micro-jumps through pockets of stable space that no sane commander would attempt to cross. The risk of disintegration was 80%. But David wasn't thinking in percentages, he was thinking about survival. Atheon's fleet hesitated for a precious 0.3 seconds. It was the first time in recorded history that the artificial intelligence had shown uncertainty. David exploited that microscopic window. He launched all his space mines in a chaotic pattern around a cluster of radioactive asteroids, turning the region into a deadly maze. When the enemy fleet tried to pursue, 3 ships were disabled by chain detonations. The simulation continued for another 17 minutes. David lost all his ships, but Atheon lost 26 of the 64. The effectiveness rate calculated by the system was precise and unforgiving, 60%. When the neural interface disconnected, David stumbled. His vision was blurred, muscles trembling from the adrenaline rush. It took him a few seconds to register the absolute silence that dominated the room. Thelkar stared at the results hologram as if contemplating a mathematical error in the universe. The other cadets were paralyzed, their bioluminescent neural networks pulsing in erratic patterns of confusion. "Impossible," one of the Velati students murmured, breaking the silence. But the numbers didn't lie. For the first time in 200 years, someone had forced Atheon to recalculate its predictions, and that someone was a human, a species the galaxy considered too primitive to pose a real tactical threat. David Chen had just changed everything, and he didn't even realize the magnitude of what he had unleashed. The 48 hours following David's test were a whirlwind of analysis, interrogation, and constant observation. He was transferred to an isolated wing of the Academy, where Velati tactical experts reproduced his simulation countless times, trying to decipher the logic behind his decisions. The problem was that there was no logic in the sense they understood. David sat in a sterile observation room, crystal walls allowing a dozen senior officers to study him like a fascinating specimen. Admiral Coursevel, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet, had personally arrived from the Central Station. His presence was an unprecedented event. Admirals did not visit academies to observe cadets, no matter how impressive their performance. Coursevel was imposing even by Velati standards. His translucent skin was marked by radiation scars, testimonies to decades of service in combat zones. His neural networks glowed in amber tones, indicating intense information processing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Explain your decision to send the damaged ship directly into the gravitational field," Coursevel ordered. "Standard tactical protocols require resource preservation until defeat is inevitable. You sacrificed a functional asset prematurely." David had rehearsed this conversation mentally dozens of times, yet he still felt the inadequacy of his words. How to explain intuition to beings who operated purely on quantifiable logic? "Sir, Atheon was defeating me because I was trying to beat it on its own turf," David began, choosing each word carefully. "Processing speed, predictability, efficiency. On those metrics, I could never compete, so I decided to change the rules of the game." "There are no different rules in tactical combat," another officer retorted, his voice translated in cold tones. "There are only variables and probabilities." "With all due respect, sir, that's exactly the point," David replied, feeling an unexpected confidence growing within him. "Atheon operates based on probabilities. It predicts what is most likely, most efficient, most logical. But humans were not shaped by efficiency. We were shaped by survival against impossible odds. I learned to think not about what I should do, but about what would never be expected." Courceville tilted his head, a gesture David had learned to recognize as intense concentration. Are you suggesting that irrational unpredictability is a tactical advantage? Not irrational, sir. Unconventional. There is a difference. The Admiral remained silent for long moments, processing. Then, to the surprise of everyone in the room, he did something no Velarthi officer was supposed to do. He smiled. It wasn't a natural expression for his species, more a deliberate arrangement of facial muscles to communicate approval, but the gesture was clear. Interesting, Courceville murmured. Very interesting. The meeting ended without definitive conclusions, but David could feel that something had changed. He returned to the Academy's main quarters, where the other cadets avoided him with a mixture of respect and discomfort. Only one Velarthi approached him that night, Sielna, one of the top students in his class. Your performance was statistically anomalous, she said, her translated voice carrying tones of genuine curiosity. I reviewed your biometric data during the simulation. Your adrenaline levels exceeded safe parameters. Your heart rate was in the danger zone. How did you maintain cognitive clarity under such physiological stress? David almost laughed. We humans call it adrenaline for a reason. It's our secret weapon. When we face extreme danger, our bodies go into emergency mode. We think faster, move faster, ignore pain. It's inefficient, wastes energy, and will probably kill us sooner, but it keeps you alive when nothing else would work. Sielna processed this, her neural networks pulsing in patterns David had learned to associate with confusion. Fascinating. Your species sacrifices longevity for short-term performance in crisis situations. Exactly. That's why we're still alive, even when the universe has been trying to kill us since we left the caves. The conversation was interrupted by the same sharp alarm that had marked the start of the tests. But this time, the tone was different, more urgent, more threatening. David and Sielna rushed to the Academy's command center, where they found absolute chaos. Holograms filled the air, showing real-time data flow from the Federation's communication network. Commander Thelkar was at the center of the information storm, coordinating with authorities in 3 different star systems. What's going on? David asked a nearby cadet. The Kresh Coalition, the student replied, his voice trembling even through the neural translation. They attacked the mining station at Helios Prime. 16 ships destroyed, thousands of civilians isolated. David felt his blood run cold. The Kresh Coalition was a belligerent faction from the Outer Rim, known for its aggression and disregard for Federation laws. They had maintained a tense peace for decades, but had always been a potential threat. Why now? Sielna murmured, more to herself than to anyone. Risk analysis indicated only an 8% probability of open conflict in the next 5 cycles. Thelkar heard the question and turned, his 3 eyes focusing on David with an intensity that made the human take a step back. They attacked now because they know Atheon can be defeated. News of your test leaked through diplomatic channels. The Coalition has its own collective intelligences, minds created by the fusion of millions of consciousnesses. They analyzed your strategy and identified vulnerabilities in Federation tactical doctrine. The weight of those words fell on David like a collapsing orbital station. His victory, his moment of triumph, had destabilized the galactic balance of power. He had proven that the Federation's supremacy was not absolute. How many casualties David asked, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. Still calculating, Delcar replied. But projections are severe. Helios Prime is a critical mining system. Its loss would weaken our antimatter production by 43%. And the Federation's response? It's already in motion. The Third Fleet has been deployed, under the command of Admiral Courceville. Delcar paused, his eyes studying David with a mixture of emotions the human couldn't decipher. And you have been summoned. The silence that followed was absolute. David blinked, certain he had misheard. Summoned? Sir, I'm just a cadet. I haven't even graduated yet. You are no longer a cadet, Delcar corrected. By direct order of the Central Council, you have been promoted to Field Tactical Commander. You will take control of a rapid response force and be deployed to Helios Prime immediately. David felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. This was insanity. He had 18 months of training, 0 real combat experience, and now he was being sent to defend a critical system against a large-scale invasion. With all due respect, sir, this makes no tactical sense, David protested, his voice filled with disbelief. There are thousands of more experienced, more qualified officers. And they all think like Artheon, Courceville interrupted, emerging from the shadows of the command room. David hadn't noticed the Admiral's presence. The Kresh Coalition has studied our tactics for decades. They know our doctrine better than we know ourselves. We need someone who thinks differently, someone unpredictable. You want me to win a real war using improvisation and chaos? David asked, incredulous. No, Courceville replied, his voice firm as forged steel. I want you to do exactly what you did in the simulation, change the rules of the game. David looked around the room, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate test, another simulation. But the cadets' faces were serious. The holograms showed real data, and the weight of responsibility was too tangible to be artificial. He had spent 18 months proving he could keep up with the Velothi. Now, he needed to prove that humanity deserved its place in the galaxy. When do we leave? David asked, his voice steady, despite the fear running in his veins. Courceville showed that unnatural smile again. Immediately. Your ship is being prepared. You will have 16 Raptor-class ships, 3 support cruisers, and 1 heavy equipment freighter. It's not an impressive fleet, but it's what we can spare, without compromising other defenses. 20 ships against a large-scale invasion. The odds were overwhelming. But David Chen had learned something crucial in the last 48 hours. Probabilities were just numbers, and numbers could be broken by those willing to risk everything. He nodded in agreement, feeling the weight of thousands of lives' destiny on his shoulders. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson Earth had known for millennia. Never underestimate the human capacity to turn the impossible into the inevitable. The command ship assigned to David was a Sentinel-class cruiser named Resilience, a name he found appropriately ironic. The vessel had 40 years of active service, its armor patched and the weapons systems updated so many times that the original design was just a memory in the databases. It was essentially a relic kept functional by ingenuity and necessity. David strode through the Galactic Tactical Academy's boarding dock, carrying only a small bag with his personal belongings. Around him, Velothi technicians worked with mechanical efficiency, preparing the fleet for immediate departure. The 16 Raptor ships were already lined up in formation, their metallic hulls reflecting the blue light of the station's processors. When he climbed the Resilience's access ramp, he was greeted by a figure who was definitely not Velarthi. "Commander Chen, I presume," the woman said, extending her hand in an unequivocally human gesture. She was about 40, black hair pulled back in an impeccable military bun, and eyes that carried the weight of many battles. "Commander Sarah Okonkwo, Resilience Chief Engineer. Welcome to the Federation's most improbable ship." David shook her hand, feeling an unexpected relief at meeting another human. "Improbable? We are the only mixed crew in the fleet," Sarah explained as she led David through the ship's cramped corridors. 3 humans, 12 Velarthi, 4 Kryn, and 2 Tessic observers. It's an experimental integration project the Federation implemented 6 months ago. The results have been, shall we say, interesting. Interesting good or interesting problematic? Depends on who you ask. The Velarthi find our eating habits disturbing. The Kryn don't understand why we need to sleep. And the Tessic are fascinated by the fact that we sweat. David almost smiled, but the reality of the situation weighed too heavily. "And you? How did you end up here?" Sarah paused before a door that opened with a hydraulic hiss. 10 years in the Earth Navy, 5 years as a field engineer on mining colonies. When the Federation opened positions for humans in technical roles, I applied. I found that fixing alien warp drives isn't that different from fixing ours. It just requires more creativity. They entered the command bridge, a circular space dominated by 3-dimensional holograms and control stations arranged in concentric rings. At the center, an elevated platform offered a complete view of all operations. It was there that David would take command. The crew was already at combat stations. David recognized some Velarthi from the Academy, but most were new faces, or rather, new visages, as some species present didn't exactly have faces in the human sense. An impressively tall Velarthi approached, his posture emanating military authority. "Commander Chen, I am Subcommander Vrixtal. I will be coordinating tactical operations under your leadership." There was an almost imperceptible tension in his translated voice. David recognized it immediately. Professional skepticism. "Subcommander?" David replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I appreciate your experience. I'll need it." Vrixtal tilted his head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Commander, I must express my concern. You have minimal training and no real combat experience. The fleet under your command represents significant Federation resources. Wouldn't it be more prudent to yield operational command to a more veteran officer?" It was a fair question, and David respected the honesty. "Sub-Commander, you are absolutely correct. I have no experience. But the Kresh Coalition already knows how experienced officers think and act. They have studied our doctrine, analyzed our tactics. If we send another conventional fleet, they will have already predicted every move. And your solution is unpredictability? My solution is to do what they wouldn't expect any sane commander to do." Vrixtal processed this, his neural networks pulsing in complex patterns. Finally, he nodded. "I understand the logic, although I disagree with the methodology. Nevertheless, I will follow your orders, Commander." Sarah approached, carrying a tablet with technical specifications. "Speaking of unconventional methodology, I need you to see this." She projected a hologram showing the Helios Prime system. The Coalition has established a defensive perimeter around the main mining station. 12 destroyer-class warships, dozens of smaller patrols, and sensors throughout the system. Any conventional approach will be detected hours in advance. David studied the hologram, his mind processing the information. Helios Prime was a binary system with 3 habitable planets and 2 asteroid belts, rich in rare minerals. The mining station orbited the second planet, a strategic position that allowed quick access to resources. "How long until we arrive?" David asked. 12 hours at maximum warp speed," replied the pilot, a blue-scaled grin, "but that will leave us without enough energy for prolonged combat maneuvers. Then we'll reduce to cruising speed. We'll arrive in 14 hours, but with full tanks and ready for action." Vrixtal frowned. What would be his brow? "That gives the Coalition more time to strengthen their defenses. It also gives them more time to get confident," David countered. "Subcommander, I need information about our cargo. What are we transporting besides standard weaponry?" Sarah consulted her tablet. "Heavy mining equipment that was supposed to be delivered to Helios Prime before the attack. We have asteroid drills, controlled demolition explosives, long-range seismic scanners, nothing of direct military value." David felt an idea begin to form. "Nothing of conventional military value, you mean?" The engineer looked at him with growing interest. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the Coalition expects a traditional combat fleet. They prepared their defenses against warships, against orthodox tactics." David zoomed in on the hologram, focusing on the asteroid belts. "But what if we didn't arrive as a war fleet?" "Explain," Vrixtal demanded, his neural networks glowing intensely. "How many civilian ships are registered for mining operations in Helios Prime?" David asked. Sarah checked the data. 143 before the attack. Most managed to evacuate, but 37 are still trapped in the system, hidden in the asteroid fields. "Perfect. We'll join them." The silence on the bridge was absolute. Vrixtal was the first to break it. "Are you suggesting we disguise ourselves as civilian miners?" "Not just that," David replied, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "We'll create informational chaos. We'll use the civilian ships as cover, make our energy signatures look like mining operations, and infiltrate the system before the Coalition realizes we're not scared refugees." "That is basic tactical deception," Vrixtal observed. "The Coalition will not be easily fooled. It won't just be deception. We'll actually mine the asteroids. We'll drill, extract, process minerals. We'll do everything miners would do, except we'll be strategically positioning explosive charges and creating ambush points." Sarah started to smile, understanding the vision. "You want to turn the asteroid field into a giant minefield." "Exactly, and when the Coalition finally realizes we're not defenseless civilians, we'll already be inside their defense zone, surrounded by traps they themselves allowed us to set." Vrixtal processed the strategy, his objections visible in the way his neural networks pulsed. But slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. "It is risky, it is unorthodox, it is statistically improbable to work. But it's exactly what they wouldn't expect," David completed. "Precisely," Vrixtal admitted. "I will begin preparations. But Commander, a caveat. If this fails, there will be no rescue. We will be deep, within hostile territory, without support, without reinforcements." David looked through the main bridge viewer, where the stars began to stretch as the Resilience entered warp speed. 20 ships against an invasion, mining equipment against war destroyers, a human cadet against the collective, intelligence of the Kresh Coalition. The odds were absurd, but David had learned something crucial. The galaxy operated on probabilities, but humanity thrived on impossibilities. "Then we better not fail," he replied simply. The crew returned to their stations, and the bridge came alive with activity. Sarah coordinated modifications to the energy emitters to disguise their signatures. Rikstal organized tactical simulations with the captains of the other ships. The Kryn technicians adjusted the weapon systems for precision operations in asteroid fields. And David Chen, the only human to command a Galactic Federation combat force, watched it all with a mixture of fear and determination. Helios Prime awaited them, and with it, the chance to prove that humanity was not just resilient, it was dangerous. The resilience emerged from warp space on the outskirts of the Helios Prime system, its energy signatures deliberately reduced to the minimum detectable. David watched the tactical holograms materialize around the command bridge, each point of light representing a potential threat or a hidden ally. "Report," he ordered, his voice firm, despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. Rikstal manipulated the controls with characteristic Velathy precision. 12 Kresh destroyers in orbit of the mining station, as expected, smaller patrols distributed throughout the asteroid belts, also detecting interesting. He zoomed in on a section of the hologram. 32 civilian ships still in the system, hidden among the asteroids. Their energy signatures are minimal, trying to avoid detection. "Perfect," David murmured. "Sarah, status of our camouflage?" The chief engineer checked her instruments, fingers flying over the tactile controls. "Energy emitters recalibrated. Our signatures now match medium-class mining freighters. Unless the Coalition performs a deep scan, we should pass for refugees trying to escape." "And our weaponry?" "Shields in passive mode, weapons on cold standby. From the perspective of external sensors, we are just scared miners looking for a way out." David nodded, satisfied. "Then let's behave like it. Navigation, plot an erratic course through the largest asteroid belt. I want us to look lost and desperate." The Kryn pilot, who had introduced himself as Scarth, hissed in approval. "Route calculated, Commander, included random deviations and exaggerated course corrections. Any observer will conclude we are avoiding perceived threats." "Excellent. Execute." The fleet of 20 ships began its cautious approach, each ship following a slightly different movement pattern to reinforce the illusion of controlled panic. David watched the sensors, looking for any indication that the Coalition had detected their true nature. Minutes turned into tense hours. The fleet entered the first asteroid belt, a dense region of mountain-sized space rocks orbiting the primary star. Sarah coordinated the actual mining operations, deploying teams to drill selected asteroids while simultaneously installing explosive charges at the structurally weakest points. "Commander," Rikstal's voice brought David back to full focus. "Intercepting Coalition communication, they have detected our presence." David's heart quickened. Nature of the communication? Routine. They are cataloging refugee ships for eventual processing. They show no suspicion of our identity. David exhaled slowly. The disguise was working. "Maintain constant monitoring. How long until we complete the positioning of the first charges?" Sarah consulted the field teams. 4 hours at the current pace. "But Commander, we have a complication." She projected a new hologram showing a Kresh ship approaching their position. "Enemy patrol on interception course. They should reach us in 20 minutes. Composition of the patrol: 1 Hunter-class corvette, crew of 16, light armament but high-resolution sensors. If they perform a full scan, our camouflage will be compromised. David pondered the options. Fleeing would reveal their capabilities. Attacking would alert the entire enemy fleet. He needed a third alternative. Sarah, our mining charges produce radiation signatures when detonated, correct? Yes, Commander. It's the asteroid fragmentation process. Why? Because we're going to give them exactly what they expect to see. David turned to Vrixtal. Sub-Commander, select a medium-sized asteroid in the patrol's path. I want a full mining operation at that location, with detonation scheduled for when they are performing their scan. Vrixtal understood immediately. The explosion's radiation will interfere with their sensors, making it difficult to get an accurate reading of our signatures. Exactly. And it will look like we're just desperately trying to extract resources for repairs or fuel. The team moved with impressive efficiency. One of the support cruisers detached, approaching the selected asteroid while beginning ostensible drilling operations. David watched through the video feeds as mining drones drilled the rocky surface, installing charges in a way that looked purely industrial. The crash corvette emerged from behind a larger asteroid, its sensors already sweeping the area. David could imagine the enemy crew's confusion at finding refugees mining asteroids in the middle of a war zone. Detonation in 10 seconds, Sarah announced. David watched the countdown, each number increasing the tension on the bridge. When it reached 0, the asteroid exploded in a brilliant cascade of superheated fragments. The radiation wave expanded, creating a cloud of interference that covered the entire surrounding area. Enemy patrol reducing speed, Vrixtal reported. Attempting to compensate for the interference, their sensors are recalibrating. Sarah, energy emitters? Stable. Maintaining civilian freighter profile. They are scanning us, but through the radiation cloud we should look exactly like what we want to look like. Seconds dragged like hours. David could hear his own breathing in the tense silence of the bridge. Then finally, the crash corvette altered its course, passing by without approaching further. Threat moving away, Vrixtal confirmed. Relief evident even through the neural translation. It worked, Commander. David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. One threat neutralized, a few dozen more to go. Sarah, continue mining operations. I want every asteroid within a 50-kilometer radius of the station prepared as a potential trap. In the following hours, the operation unfolded with increasing precision. The teams developed an efficient rhythm, drilling asteroids, installing explosives, and disguising everything as legitimate mining. Each charge was connected to a remote detonator that David could activate from the Resilience's bridge. But it wasn't just about explosives. Sarah had a brilliant idea to install false signal emitters on selected asteroids. When activated, they would create signatures mimicking Federation warships, making it seem like massive reinforcements had arrived. That's genius, David admitted when she presented the plan. We'll create a phantom army. I learned from the best, Sarah replied with a smile. On Earth, we call it information warfare. If you can't win by force, win by confusion. Vrixtal, who had remained skeptical throughout the operation, began to show signs of reluctant approval. I must admit, Commander, your approach is effective precisely because it is illogical from a traditional tactical standpoint. No war manual would predict the use of mining equipment as strategic weaponry. That's because war manuals are written To win battles, David responded, not to win impossible battles. After 6 hours of intense work, the trap was set. 73 asteroids loaded with explosives, 42 false signal emitters, and 3 carefully planned escape routes through corridors only small ships could navigate. But David knew the easy phase was over. Now they needed to lure the Kresh Coalition into the trap. Communications, he ordered. Open frequency transmission, no encryption. I want everyone in the system to hear. The communications officer, a young Velathi named Treshika, adjusted the controls. Channel open, Commander. Awaiting your message. David took a deep breath. What he was about to do violated every military communication protocol. But protocols wouldn't win this battle. Attention, Kresh Coalition forces. This is Commander David Chen. Galactic Federation. I am transmitting from a position in the primary asteroid belt. I have come to offer the terms of your surrender. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Even Vrixtol seemed momentarily paralyzed by shock. David continued, keeping his voice calm and authoritative. You have 1 hour to vacate the mining station and abandon this system. Any ship remaining after that time will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. This is your only warning. He signaled Treshka to cut the transmission. Then he turned to face the bridge, full of incredulous stares. Commander, Vrixtal began, his voice filled with careful disbelief. You have just declared intent to engage 12 destroyers with a fleet of 20 lightly armed ships. They will laugh at your transmission. No, David corrected. They will be confused. And then they will be curious. And then they will come to investigate with enough force to crush us, but not so much that they compromise the station's defense. And when they arrive and discover we are only a small force, David smiled, and there was something vaguely predatory in that expression. That's when they'll discover that asteroids can explode at very inconvenient times. Sarah laughed, a genuinely amused sound. Operation Kaleidoscope. I like it. Operation Kaleidoscope? Vrixtal repeated. Yes, David explained. Because we're going to make them see threats everywhere, multiplied and distorted until they don't know what's real and what's illusion. And when they finally realize the truth, it will be too late. The sensors began to detect movement in the enemy fleet. As predicted, 6 destroyers were detaching, heading toward David's position. The trap was about to close, and the Kresh Coalition still had no idea what awaited them. The 6 Kresh destroyers advanced through the asteroid belt with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Each ship was 3 times the size of the Resilience, heavy armor gleaming under the light of the binary stars. Their sensors constantly swept space, searching for the Federation fleet that had dared to challenge them. David watched their approach through the tactical holograms, each beat of his heart marking the time until confrontation. His hands were surprisingly steady on the command controls, the adrenaline transforming nervousness into laser focus. Enemy distance, 50,000 kilometers, and closing, Vrixtal announced. Standard Kresh attack formation, Theta variant. I predict they will open fire as soon as they reach 30,000 kilometers. Sarah, status of the false emitters. Ready for activation. I have 42 signals programmed to mimic different classes of Federation ships. When we activate, it will look like we have a fleet of 80 ships in the system. Wait for my signal. David zoomed in on the tactical visualization, studying the position of each armed asteroid. He had spent the last hours memorizing every detail, every angle, every possible escape route. Now was the time to find out if all that preparation would pay off. 40,000 kilometers, Vrixtal updated. Detecting increase in weapon energy. They are preparing for engagement. Perfect. Treshka, open transmission again. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, Commander. David took a deep breath, projecting confidence he was only half feeling. Crash forces, last chance to retreat. You are entering an interdiction zone. There will be no second warning. The response came seconds later, a translated voice filled with disdain. Federation ship, your sensors must be faulty. We detect only 20 ships in your force. We prepared 8 times that number to ensure your destruction. Surrender now and your crews will be spared. Thank you for confirming your position, David replied calmly. Sarah, activate the emitters, all of them. The space around the Resilience exploded with energy signatures. Suddenly, where there had been 20 ships, enemy sensors now detected 80. Cruisers, destroyers, even 2 signals mimicking Titan-class battleships. Every signal was fake, yet indistinguishable from a real vessel to any standard scanner. The crash formation visibly faltered, their ships slowing down as they recalibrated sensors. Now, David ordered. All ships, alpha dispersal pattern. I want every vessel to take a different route through the asteroids. Make it look like we're flanking them. The fleet split into 20 distinct vectors, each ship vanishing among the asteroids, while the false emitters created the illusion of a massive force converging from multiple directions. To the Kresh commanders, it must have looked like they had stumbled into a trap. Enemies are regrouping, Vrixtal reported. Defensive formation. They are confused, trying to acquire definite targets. Keep the pressure on. Scarth, I want random micro-jumps. Appear at one point, disappear before they can lock position. The Kryn pilot hissed in excitement. Finally, something interesting. Executing. The Resilience vanished in a flash of distorted energy, reappearing 3 kilometers ahead, then again and again. Each jump was calculated to keep the ship in constant motion, impossible to predict, impossible to track accurately. The other ships followed suit, creating a chaotic ballet of appearances and disappearances that overloaded the enemy tracking systems. And all the while, the false emitters continued broadcasting signals of dozens of ships that simply didn't exist. They are opening fire, Vrixtal warned. Dispersed targets without proper coordination. Energy beams sliced through space, some hitting asteroids and creating explosions of vaporized rock. Others chased false signals, wasting ammunition against ghosts. The confusion was palpable. David waited, watching the Kresh destroyers delve deeper into the asteroid field, their perfect formations breaking down as they tried to track multiple targets. When they finally reached the position he had been waiting for, surrounded by carefully selected asteroids, he gave the order. Detonate Sequence 1. Sarah hit the controls. 12 asteroids exploded simultaneously, each releasing energy equivalent to a nuclear warhead. The shockwaves propagated in overlapping patterns, creating zones of massive interference that temporarily blinded enemy sensors. But it wasn't just about blinding them. David had positioned the asteroids to create a channeling effect, forcing the destroyers to move into specific routes if they wanted to avoid the rain of superheated fragments. And every one of those routes was mined with more traps. 2 destroyers have sustained shield damage, Brickstyle reported, a touch of admiration creeping into his voice. They are attempting to retreat, but the debris field is blocking direct routes. Then let's make the decision even easier for them. Sequence 2, detonate. More asteroids exploded, this time blocking the retreat routes. The crash destroyers were now trapped in a labyrinth of debris, radiation, and false signals. Their perfect formations became chaotic, each ship trying to navigate independently. It was exactly what David wanted: separated, confused, reacting instead of acting. All ships, Charlie attack pattern, targets of opportunity, weapons free. The 20 real ships of David's fleet emerged from their hiding spots among the asteroids, launching torpedoes and firing energy weapons at the isolated destroyers. They weren't powerful enough to destroy the larger ships, but every hit weakened shields, damaged sensors, and created more confusion. One destroyer tried to chase 3 Raptor ships, only to have its path blocked by a perfectly timed asteroid explosion. Another tried to lock position on a cruiser signal, wasting ammunition on a false emitter mounted on a space rock. "Commander," Sarah's voice held a new urgency. "I'm detecting a shift in enemy communication patterns. They are trying to coordinate through the interference." David had anticipated this. No tactic, however effective, would last forever. "How long until they succeed?" 3 to 5 minutes. When they do, they'll realize half our signals are fake. Then we have to make sure that when they realize it, it's too late. David studied the tactical position. 4 destroyers were still relatively intact. 2 had sustained significant damage. "Brickstyle, identify the lead vessel. It should be the one transmitting the most coordination data." The sub-commander worked quickly. "Tactical designation, Kresh Alpha, position 327. It's the largest destroyer, likely the command ship." "Perfect. Sarah, do we still have those proximity mines we installed in the Delta corridor?" The engineer checked. "Yes, 18 active mines." "Why?" "Because we're going to make that ship chase us directly through them." David activated direct communications with the captains of his Raptor ships. "Attention, fighter groups 1, 2, and 3. Concentrate fire on the designated Kresh Alpha destroyer. Minimal damage, just enough to tick them off. Make it look like we're focusing all our strength on that one ship." The attack groups moved with precision, 9 Raptor ships converging on the command destroyer from different angles. Torpedoes and energy beams struck the larger ship's shields, causing insignificant damage but drawing full attention. The destroyer responded as David expected, turning to face the perceived threat and accelerating in pursuit. "It's taking the bait," Brickstyle confirmed. "Interception route will take it directly through the Delta corridor in 45 seconds. David watched the countdown, every second increasing the tension. The Kresh destroyer sliced through space, its cannons firing constantly at the Raptor ships that danced within its range but always outside lethal reach. 30 seconds. Fighter groups, prepare for emergency dispersal. 20 seconds. The destroyer entered the Delta corridor, its sensors finally detecting the mines. But it was too late to significantly alter course. 10 seconds. Disperse now. The Raptor ships executed emergency jumps in different directions, disappearing in flashes of distorted energy. The destroyer tried to slow down, but its mass and momentum were too great. 0. 18 proximity mines detonated in a cascade, each explosion feeding the next. The concentrated shockwave hit the destroyer's shields like a cosmic hammer. The armor held the first impact, and the second, but on the third, the shields failed. The ship emerged from the sequence of explosions with damaged systems, failing thrusters, and collapsing communications. Enemy command ship disabled, Vrixtal announced, and for the first time, David detected something close to excitement in his voice. The other destroyers have lost central coordination. It was the moment David had been waiting for. With the command ship neutralized, the other crash vessels were operating with limited autonomy, lacking the collective intelligence that made their tactics so effective. All ships, wolfpack formation, isolated targets, coordinated attack. The 20 real ships of the fleet reorganized, groups of 4, hunting each destroyer separately. They didn't try to destroy the larger ships directly. Instead, they focused on specific systems, sensors, communications, thrusters, cutting capabilities, further isolating each enemy. And always using the armed asteroids to channel enemy movements, create denial zones, and force impossible decisions. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was already decided. Separated, blind, uncoordinated, and trapped in a maze of traps and false signals, the crash ships stood no chance. When the last destroyer finally transmitted a surrender request, David almost didn't believe it. They had won. 20 ships against 6 destroyers, mining equipment against wartime armament, human chaos against collective logic. And chaos had triumphed. The bridge of the Resilience erupted in celebration, even the normally reserved Valathi showing signs of excitement. Sarah hugged David hard enough to nearly crack his ribs. Even Vrixtal allowed something close to a smile to cross his features. But David knew it wasn't over yet. 6 neutralized destroyers meant there were still 6 others at the mining station, and those 6 now knew exactly what they were up against. The victory over the 6 destroyers brought only a brief moment of relief. David knew the real battle was yet to come. The remaining 6 ships of the Kresh Coalition, now alerted to their tactics, would not make the same mistakes. Worse, they held thousands of civilians as human shields at the mining station. "Damage report," David ordered, forcing his mind to focus beyond the euphoria of victory. Shh consulted her systems. 2 Raptor ships with compromised shields, 1 with damaged thrusters. The Resilience has lost 20% of its armament capacity. Nothing critical, but we are far from maximum strength. Vrixtal was monitoring intercepted communications. The crash forces at the station are regrouping, detecting a significant increase in data transmissions. They are sharing tactical analysis of our previous battle. "So they learned," David murmured. "They won't fall for the same traps." "Correct," Vrixtal confirmed, "and furthermore, they are using the civilians as leverage. I intercepted a transmission threatening to execute 50 refugees every hour. We don't retreat from the system." David's blood ran cold. He had anticipated many scenarios, but not this level of calculated cruelty. The Kresh weren't just defending conquered territory, they were forcing an impossible choice. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice strained. 47 minutes until the first scheduled execution. Less than an hour to save thousands of lives. David closed his eyes, allowing his mind to process the problem. He couldn't use the same tactics. He couldn't risk a prolonged battle that would result in civilian deaths. He needed something different, something the Coalition would never expect. Sarah, he said, slowly, an idea beginning to form. That mining equipment we transported, you said it included long-range seismic scanners, right? Yes, used to map internal asteroid structures. Why? Can they be modified to scan artificial structures, like, say, a space station? The engineer processed the question, then her eyes lit up with understanding. You want to map the interior of the station, find where the civilians are being held. More than that, I want to find every structural weak point, every vulnerability, and then we'll use that information to get inside without firing a single shot. Rickstahl turned his 3-compound eyes toward David. Impossible. The station has multi-layered defenses, sensors covering all approaches. Any infiltration attempt would be detected instantly. By a ship, yes, David agreed. But what if we don't use a ship? The silence that followed was heavy with confusion. Sarah was the first to break it. Are you suggesting an external team approach, EVA through the vacuum? Not exactly. I'm suggesting we use the debris from the previous battlefield as camouflage. Escape pods, hull fragments, damaged equipment. Everything floating naturally toward the station, seemingly just more space junk. The audacity of the plan was stunning and completely insane by conventional tactical standards. "Commander," Rickstahl began, and David could hear the internal battle in his voice. "This would violate at least 17 mission safety protocols. The chances of success are statistically insignificant." "Then it's perfect," David replied, "because they would never expect us to be so reckless." Sarah was already working on the calculations. We'd need modified EVA suits, minimal signature thrusters, and a lot of luck. How many people on the infiltration team? 4, David decided. Me, you, and 2 close-quarters combat specialists. Small enough to remain undetectable, large enough to carry out the rescue. "You cannot personally lead," Rickstahl protested. "It's against all command doctrines." "Doctrines haven't won this battle so far," David countered, "and I need someone who thinks like me inside. Sub-commander, you will assume command of the fleet. If we fail, you have full authorization to retreat and request reinforcements." For a long moment, Rickstahl was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Understood, Commander, but return alive. The galaxy apparently needs more illogical thinkers like you." Coming from a Velathi, it was the highest possible compliment. The next 35 minutes were a frenzy of preparation. Sarah modified 4 EVA suits, installing camouflage field generators that masked their thermal signatures. The seismic scanners were adapted to create a complete 3-dimensional map of the station's interior. David selected 2 Kryn for the infiltration team. Scarth, the pilot, and a rescue tactics specialist named Vreshita. Both possessed the necessary agility for zero-gravity combat and the experience to make decisions under extreme pressure. "Approach route calculated," Scarth hissed, displaying a hologram. "We will use fragments of the Kresh Alpha destroyer as a shield. Natural drift should take us within 15 meters of the station's external structure in 22 minutes. "And if we are detected?" Vreshta asked. "Then we improvise," David answered simply. As always, the team launched from the Resilience's cargo bay, each member wrapped in carefully arranged metal fragments to look like random debris. David floated in the absolute vacuum, only the sound of his own breathing and the data on his visor breaking the silence. The drift through space was agonizing. Every minute felt like an hour. David watched the mining station slowly grow in his field of view, its sensors constantly sweeping the surrounding space. But they passed unnoticed. Just more debris in the cloud resulting from the battle. When they finally reached the station's external structure, Sarah activated the modified scanners. Data began to flow, creating a detailed map of the interior. Corridors, rooms, life support systems, and crucially, a large containment area where heat signatures indicated hundreds of civilians clustered together. "Found it," Sarah transmitted over the private channel. "Level 17, Sector Gamma. Approximately 1,200 civilians in containment. Guards? At least 20 Kresh signatures, armed and alert." David studied the map. There was a route through maintenance ducts that would take them within 50 meters of the containment sector without passing through main areas, but they would have to move fast. "Scarth, you and Vreshta create a distraction on level 15, something that draws most of the guards. Sarah and I will go straight to the containment sector." The plan was risky, depending on perfect synchronization, but it was all they had. The team split up. David and Sarah navigated through the narrow ducts, their bodies compressed into spaces never designed for human passage. Sweat dripped down David's face, but he kept moving, meter by meter. Behind them, an explosion echoed through the station's structure. Scarth had detonated a small charge on a power transformer, creating controlled chaos that sent Kresh security teams scrambling to investigate. David and Sarah emerged into an empty corridor 50 meters from the containment sector. They could hear voices through the sealed doors, the murmur of thousands of people huddled in fear. 5 remaining guards, Sarah whispered, consulting her scanner, "positioned at the main entrances." "Then we won't use the main entrances," David replied. He examined the external wall of the containment sector, identifying a section that the scanners indicated was structurally weaker. "Sarah, can you cut through here?" "With a precision laser and a lot of time?" "Yes." "Quickly and silently?" "No." David thought fast. "Then we'll make intentional noise. Use a controlled explosive charge, small enough not to depressurize the sector, but large enough to create an opening." Sarah hesitated for only a second before agreeing. She positioned the charge carefully, calculating exactly the necessary force. "Detonation in 3, 2, 1. The explosion was muffled but effective. A 2-meter hole opened in the wall. David plunged through it, finding himself face to face with 1,200 terrified people. "Galactic Federation," he announced, his voice amplified by the suit. "We are here to get you out. Remain calm and follow instructions." The chaos that followed was controlled only by the presence of Sarah and David, organizing the civilians into groups. But then the Kresh guards arrived, alerted by the noise. David didn't hesitate. He launched stun grenades, creating enough confusion for Sarah to open another breach in the opposite wall. The civilians began to flow through it, entering evacuation corridors that would lead to the escape docks. But the guards were recovering and reinforcements were arriving. That's when David made the most human decision possible. He stayed behind. "Sarah, take them to the docks. Scarth and Vreshta should be there." "What about you?" "I'll ensure everyone escapes." "Go. That's an order." Sarah looked at him, understanding and respect in her eyes. Then she nodded and ran, guiding the last civilians. David turned to face the crash guards alone, 4 against 1. By any logical metric, he was at a huge disadvantage. But David Chen had spent his whole life beating impossible odds. The combat was brutal and chaotic. David used everything he had: the environment, surprise, and pure human determination. When he finally emerged from the station, wounded but alive, he found Sarah and 1,200 civilians already safe in escape pods. The remaining Kresh fleet, facing the choice between continuing a lost battle or accepting defeat with honor, chose to retreat. Helios Prime was free. Weeks later, David stood before the Galactic Central Council, his wounds still visible, but healed. Admiral Coursevel presented his report, detailing every aspect of Operation Kaleidoscope. And thus, Coursevel concluded, I recommend integrating what we are calling the human effect into our tactical protocols, the ability to think not just logically, but creatively, to take risks when calculation demands caution, to improvise when doctrines fail. The council deliberated. Then the leader, an elderly Valathi with golden neural networks, spoke. Commander Chen, your victory has altered our understanding of tactical strategy. The galaxy will never be the same. David stood tall, feeling the weight of history. With respect, Council, the galaxy has always been this way. You just forgot that chaos can be as powerful as order. And looking out at the stars through the Council windows, David knew a fundamental truth. Humanity had finally proven its worth, not through strength, but through the absurd resilience of never accepting the impossible. End of story. If the tenacity of the human crew inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more chronicles from the galactic frontier, where human audacity continues to challenge the stars and rewrite the rules of the possible. Join us as we explore universes where the impossible is just the next challenge to be conquered.